is in some ways a continuation of what I was discussing yesterday. Today I'm going to talk about the second greatest naval disaster of all time, for one individual ship, accepting that the fact that there was this incident during the Punic Wars, and there was the Spanish Armada, and there was the Japanese when the kamikazes originally came up, accepting all of that. But for one ship that went down, the greatest disaster probably is the Wilhelm Gustloff, and the second greatest of all time is, our second largest death toll of all time, is probably the Goya. Now, we've all heard of the Titanic. 1,517 people were killed on that, and the reasons are usually given for that is because there weren't enough lifeboats. The reason that there wasn't enough lifeboats was because at the time lifeboats were used to ferry people from one ship to another. It wasn't thought of that they'd get on the lifeboat and wait for help to arrive. In the case of what we're going to see today, I'll talk about it first and then we can come to the conclusions maybe. So the Wilhelm Gustloff was lost because effectively there was no means of protection for it. It was almost a panic situation, which was created by the advance of the Red Army in the east, and people were panicked because of the Goebbels propaganda that made them fear what was likely to happen to them if the Soviets actually caught them. And to some extent, I need to point out that what did happen to very many people when the Soviets caught them wasn't very pleasant at all. So maybe there was some reason for the panic situation. By April of 1945, the situation, of course, in some ways was worse because the Soviets had advanced even further. There were parts of what is today, well, what was even then, before the war, Poland, which were cut off. Now, the ports of Gdansk and Gdansk fell on the 17th of March, 1945. But the Hel Peninsula, now the Hel Peninsula, if you look at a map of Poland, it drops down in order to form. It's like a sandbar, which closes part of the Bay of Gdansk, and indeed the bit below the Hel Peninsula is usually called the Bay of Putsk, there were several of there are several of these on the pre First World War border of Germany. These sandbars, very very long things, also very attractive as well, in my opinion. The Hel Peninsula was created. It was actually 3 islands in medieval times, and then there was storms, and then it became this really nice looking. You drive down, you've got beaches on both sides. It is rather attractive in the summer. The Goya sank on the 16th of April 1945. Now, the Goya was a new ship, like Wilhelm Gustloff, it was new. And so the Goya was actually built in Norway, and it was launched in 1940, 5 days, commissioned on the 4th of April 1940, and 5 days later Nazi Germany invaded and just took it. The ship itself is 146 meters long, so it's 25% shorter than the Gustloff, 17.4 meters wide. It had a capacity of 5,230 gross registered tons. Top speed was 18 knots, which is very approximately 33.5 kilometers an hour. I put it in kilometers an hour because that's easier to understand. I mean, I could have put it in miles an hour, of course, but I know, of course, that the speed at sea is knots, but most of us don't understand it. That's why I put it into kilometers an hour. The ship was put into the Kriegsmarine, and it was used for ferrying German troops around, and then it was moved to the Baltic Sea, and it was used as a target ship for the 24th U-boat flotilla. It was a U-boat training unit based in Memel, Klaipeda today, so then the target ship would be used as the enemy, and the U-boats had to sort of find it and destroy it. So it was a practice ship, so to speak. I've often wondered, when you've got these things like practice ships, you can't really fire a dummy torpedo at it or something like that. And in a state like this, where at the beginning of the war against the Soviet Union, then it wasn't so much of a risk. But I would have thought that by about 1943, having exercises like this, there was a very real danger of risk. And one thing that I see when I look at Operation Hannibal is that there were Soviet submarines in the area, and because the German submarines often signaled them requesting a response signal, they didn't realize that there were Soviet submarines, and that's allowed several of these submarines to actually escape. So now, early 1945, got East Prussia. Some parts of East Prussia still held by the Germans. Königsberg wasn't captured until almost the end of the war, but the Red Army was now over the Oder River. So it was only about 80 kilometers from Berlin, and the front actually stood there until the 13th of April 1945. So the Goya itself had been running backwards and forwards. So it ran three missions from the area of East Prussia or wherever it was, or from Hell, for example, and then it went to Schwienemunde or whatever port was actually suitable. Would be given a destination when it's en route. Now, if the port of Hell today, the port itself is on the southern part of the peninsula, and it's on so if you like, it's not on the Baltic side, it's on the inland side, the Bay of Putsk side. And the port itself, it's quite large actually for a fishing port, but for something like this, it would have been quite large. Now, another problem is that what was happening with refugees is that they probably got to Hell by boat. So you'd have smaller vessels coming in, but these weren't vessels that they could take them across the Bay of Danzig, but they couldn't actually take them further to across the Baltic Sea. So there were thousands of refugees in the port. There's nowhere for them to hide in the case of an air raid, and there was an air raid on the it's 07:05 in the morning. There's an air raid, and it was bombed. Number of victims isn't known, but I can imagine in a situation like this that these were sort of now the Soviets weren't actually noted for the amount of air raids they actually took. They did, but in a port like this, you've got a big ship in there. They can see they've got ships in there. That it now becomes a relatively easy target. And so when the first air raid comes in, they can see they radio back or got back to the base and said, yeah, it's worth having another go. So then they had another go, second air raid. This time the ship itself is actually hit. The first time it wasn't. And most importantly of all, it had some electronic device for a sort of a mine self-protection system. And this was knocked out, and the submarine tracking device was also knocked out. So that meant to say that the ship itself, the Goya, had to rely on the minesweepers that went with it. That afternoon, there was a third air raid, but all the same, the Goya was able to actually load up, and the plan was to take 6,000 passengers. But once more, and the same as what happened with the Gustloff, the people, the Kriegsmarine in charge, they didn't want to leave anyone behind. And the purser counted more than 7,000 people, but it would seem that he stopped counting at a certain point. So we don't know how many people were on this ship. And most of the people on board the ship were the military personnel. We must remember also that Operation Hannibal was to save the military first. And if there was any space left over, that was for civilians. Now, according to there's a Russian writer called Morozov. He's got his own YouTube site, which is called Tactic Media, and he reckons that there was 1,500 panzer troops on this as well. I don't know what his sources are, though, or rather I've forgotten the sources. But anyway, I'm sure it's on his site, and I just had a quick look at his site before I came here, although it's in Russian, so if you can't understand Russian, then you might be a bit more difficult. So by the time the Goya left, the weather had got a little bit cold. Okay, it was April, and the temperature outside was 6 degrees. The temperature of the water was 3 degrees. Remember all the time that it's you go into the water, particularly with your clothes on at 3 degrees, you're not going to last very long. You are going to freeze to death. So I think that the people, though, that got on the ship, they would have had some feeling of relief. At last, they've got on the ship, which is going a long distance. They could have been people who'd been on the road, literally, now for 3 months, not knowing where they're going to sleep. That have ran out of food ages ago. They're in it must have been the relief. There could have been some people who'd been on a ship. Then they don't need to be told they was only going as far as hell, because it couldn't go all the way to the end of the Baltic Sea. So there must have been this relief to be actually going somewhere. And these people were going to go to Swinemünde. That they had been told. And that was the destination at the time of the sinking. Now, the Goya was built as a cargo ship, and it had a crew that we'd expect with a freighter like this. So the first thing, if you've got a small crew, you don't need much in the way of, for example, kitchen facilities, and above all, you don't need much in the way of toilet facilities. And it's not built to carry 7,000 people. In the Gustloff, this wasn't so much of a problem, but in this one, this was. Not only that, this was the 4th voyage, and these were emergency situations. So from the previous 3 voyages, the cleaners hadn't been in. It hadn't been looked after. They had to move it as soon as possible. So you can imagine what the smell must have been like. Then again, maybe because people had been on the road for 3 months, maybe they didn't notice it so much. And the ship did have anti-aircraft guns. They'd been fitted towards the end of 1944, so it did have some type of protection. Let's remember when the Gustloff, where one of the anti-aircraft guns actually came loose, and that itself killed people at the time. There were life jackets for around 3,500 people. So 50% of the people on that ship could have a life jacket, and the lifeboats, well, it was even worse than for the Titanic. A few hundred could perhaps get off it. Anyway, so Captain Pluneke and the crew knew that if anything happened, almost all the people on board would be dead. The other ships in the convoy, they were just as overcrowded as well. So there was even no provision for carrying anybody that was shipwrecked. So convoy set sail at 1900 hours, so it's still light. Unlike when the Wilhelm Gustloff left, it was now it was getting dark, and certainly by the time they reached the open Baltic, it was dark. So the Goya was accompanied by a steamer called Kronenfels, which was built in 1944, so it's brand new, 2,834 GRT. Water tanker Agia, built in 1942, so 676 GRT, and the cargo ship, the Mercator, which had been built as a collier in 1920, 4,661 GRT, and they also had 2 minesweepers as well, which were there for security. Now, the Soviets had been mining this area as from the first week of the war. So as from June 1941, the Soviets had been mining the area. And indeed, the submarine, which I'm about to come on to, was one of those which had been doing this mining as from June of 1941. Now, the speed was that of the slowest ship. Now, in some cases, that's a good idea. But in this case, I personally don't think it was a good idea at all. That's just my opinion. I don't have all that much knowledge, let's say, of naval tactics. The slowest ship was the Kronenfels, and they'd been built in 1944, but it could only manage 16.7 kilometers an hour, 9 knots. No lighting was permitted whatsoever. And I suspect by this time everybody knew what happened to Wilhelm Gustloff. It was turning the lights on, which had led to it being spotted by a Soviet submarine. No smoking whatsoever. The red glow could have given away the position of the ship. So how many people are in the convoy? We don't know. So it might be between 15 and 20,000. Approximately. Right, so the ship sets sail, and the Kronenfels breaks down, and it takes 20 minutes for the problems with the Kronenfels to be fixed. So all this time, the other ships are hanging around waiting for the Kronenfels. At 2300 hours, Naval Commandant Kiel ordered a change of course. So it was changed to Copenhagen from Swinemünde. And this was due to the fact that there were so many refugees on the ship, and the fact that the Kronenfels needed to be repaired. They felt that though the Swinemünde didn't have the facilities to take care of these people, so the people are going to have to be looked after in Denmark, and also there was the possibility of repairing the ship there. Now, I think the refugees, though, would have been pretty happy to be going to Copenhagen rather than to Swinemünde, because it's further away from the Soviets. And in any case, if any of them had seen a military map, they would have known that the Soviets themselves were now very close to Swinemünde. So that's a much safer place to be. But, of course, it wasn't the Red Army which was the immediate danger. It was the Red Navy. And not far from where Wilhelm Gustloff had been lost 3 months earlier, Soviet submarine L3 was lurking. The commander was Captain Vladimir Konovalov, and he knew that there'd be more ships from hell. He'd been waiting for hours. This must have been reported by from planes, but not only that. There were constant. This was an extremely target-rich environment with constant ships trying to evacuate military and civilians to further west. So he spotted the convoy. Submarine surfaced to get into firing range, and at 23:52. The submarine was close enough to actually get a shot at the target. And one thing, though, it's important about this is that the submarine itself, when it spotted the targets, it was out of range, so it had to catch up. Now, this is really rare that a submarine catches up with the ships. Submarines just can't go fast enough. Okay, it was on the surface, it had to go all the time, but it didn't actually even worry it being on the surface, because the risk of being attacked was so low. And the reason the convoy was going slow was it had to go the speed of the slowest ship, and that's what happened. 4 torpedoes were shot at the Goya. Goya was chosen because it was the biggest one there. They didn't know what it was exactly, what was inside it, but as it was the biggest one, it seemed like the most suitable target. 2 torpedoes missed. One hit the forecastle, the second one hit it in the middle. So huge holes appeared, water floods in, and within seconds, the ship listed to starboard, to the right side, and then this inside. This is a contained ship. This is designed to carry goods and things. So they've got these huge spaces inside. It's not like some at the Gustloff, which had cabins. So when this turns over, people are thrown from one side to the other. Water rushes in. People are thrown into the water, which is rushing in. And not only that, now the escape is via the hatches, which are above, but they can't get to them, and because of the way it happened. But even those that did get to them, I mean, they were in an awful situation. So the few survivors, they reported these dreadful cries and screams for assistance, but there's nothing they could do. And because of the way it was built, the freighter sank in 7 minutes. thousands of people trapped below decks. They only managed to release one lifeboat. So let's even assume that it had been full of lifeboats. Because of the build, the construction of the ship, it wouldn't have been possible to have actually launched them. And the one that was launched, it immediately capsized, as there was people in the sea, so they grabbed a hold of it, and it was they pulled them down. And okay, the few life, okay, maybe not few, but the life jackets for 50% of the people on it. But you know, obviously it's 3 degrees, you're not going to survive very longer. And but the life jackets did keep the frozen bodies afloat, and so that's how they could maybe identify some of the bodies later. There were cases of people getting on floating boxes and planks and things of this nature. Now, as soon as the first explosion occurred, the convoy scattered. So the Mercator had 5,500 people on it, and it went ahead, full steam ahead, leaving the other ships behind. The minesweeper attempted to find the submarine to prevent further attacks. The water tanker, the Agia, and the second minesweeper attempted to rescue the shipwreck, but bear in mind, the minesweeper couldn't actually have too many people on it, and Agia was probably full of people anyway. The submarine, they couldn't find it, and when they realized that the submarine had gone, then they did try to pull out the people as best they could. So of the 7,000 or so people on the Goya, 165 to 177 people survived. 28 were found later. They were rescued by other ships that followed. Now, one thing happened in my life was the ship I often took. I used to travel between Britain and France a lot, and there was a ferry called the Herald of Free Enterprise. I'd been on it several times, and the Herald of Free Enterprise sank, I think it was February of 87. I've got a date of the 4th of February 87 in my head. I could be completely wrong with that. But anyway, and the thing with the car ferry is this: is the Herald of Free Enterprise had gone out of port with the bow door was open because the person whose job it was to close it was asleep, or he wasn't there, or something like that. And anyway, so you've got a car ferry. It doesn't have compartments inside. Now, I'm sure you've seen lots of things related to the Titanic, saying, well, the Titanic was unsinkable because of these compartments. And if one side got punctured, then they just closed the compartment. And in the case of something like a car ferry, there isn't any compartment. It's just a big space in the hull of the ship. And so as soon as water goes in, that's it. And in a case like this container ship, it's more or less the same. And so that obviously that was the only ship. There wasn't a choice of ships. There was whatever was available to actually help people. So that's the structure. That's the number one thing. The Soviet submarines knew where the ships would be, so they just had to wait and ambush. It was a bit like something you see these nature films where you've got a lot of fish when there's hardly any water, and you've got the birds all standing around just picking them out. So it was something like that. But the big error, of course, was the going in so slowly. The submarine would never have caught up had the ships been going at the speed that they could have done it. Strangely enough, the Soviet Union actually disputed that it had actually sunk the Goya. It denied it, and the ship's captain, Konovalov, he got the Hero of the Soviet Union award. Now, which is strange because the other person, the other ship, Marinescu, was in charge of the ones that had sunk both the Wilhelm Gustloff and the Steuben. He wasn't awarded anything, but then again, he was drunk most of the time, and I really need to do a sort of a video on him because he's the most successful Soviet U-boat commander of all time in amount of tonnage sunk. But he most of the time he was drunk, and he was on one charge after another. If you should ever visit Moscow, you go to Park Pobeda, the Victory Park, and you can see there you've got the conning tower from the L3 submarine, the submarine that sunk the Goya. It looks a bit odd, where it looks incredibly odd. Unfortunately, I've lost my photographs of it, but I'm sure there's other people got photographs of it. But it really does look strange in this park in northern part of Moscow. Now, 2 weeks later, 2 weeks after the loss of the Goya, Hitler committed suicide. Now, I don't know how many people were evacuated from East Prussia, but we're talking very large numbers. But we're talking here also of the two greatest death tolls ever in marine disasters, and there's all these other ships which aren't so well known, such as the Stuyven, amongst others, which were also lost as well. From hell, at least 150,000 people were evacuated. Now, this is a village of a few hundred people. So it's incredible numbers of people pass through these places. Now, the Goya has been actually located, it's been rediscovered. It was 58 years to the day it was actually sunk. It was found, and at the depth of 76 meters, and it's very close to where the Gustloff was lost. Anyway, good. So let's have a look at some of the questions. Oh, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'll see what I'm going to go first. Actually, I'm going to change the way I do this. I'm going to go to the questions from the points that people brought up from yesterday's video, because I think the two things are highly relevant. So Henry says this. He says, I remember the ship you're talking about, can't remember the name. Remember the ship, how many people died, and a lot more people than I thought. So sad. Yeah. So the thing is, we don't know how many people actually died because nobody was taken. It wasn't like the Titanic where there was everybody had to buy a ticket, and you can go onto websites and find out who was actually on the ship. Gibraltar steamboat. Aha, there's another naval thing. Some nice work, thanks. The Bop City says, thanks for keeping the history alive. While the whole world knows about the Titanic and Hollywood has raked in billions with movies and TV shows, creating a highly profitable Titanic industry that never ends, most people have never heard of Wilhelm Gustloff. In my opinion, it was a horrifying and necessary war crime that has been largely forgotten. Then a few days after Wilhelm Gustloff, another German passenger line called SS General von Steuben was also torpedoed by the Russians with a loss of about 4,500 passengers, mostly wounded German soldiers and civilians. Another almost forgotten story. To the victor goes the spoils, which also means revising history in favor of the victors. Okay. Well, I'm not going to knock Hollywood for giving people what they want, but then again, I suppose it. How many films have been made about the Titanic? I don't know, maybe 10, something like that. What is it that some things become sort of iconic and other things aren't? I don't know if iconic's the right word. I'm just sort of using it. But anyway, so I just need to point out, now I'm going to the next one, that even the Germans agree that Gustloff was not a war crime. However, November 1941, two H.E. Heinkel 111s torpedoed and sank the Soviet hospital ship Armenia, in spite of it having the requisite Red Cross flags painted quite clearly. Of the over 7,000 souls on board, only 8 survived. Now, and this happened. It's a good point. I don't think that the sinking of Gustloff was a war crime. In the case of the Armenia was coming from Odessa, which had been, and I think it was going towards the Crimea. Sorry, I can't remember. Was it going towards? Forgotten. No, I think it was from Odessa to the Crimea, and so Odessa was actually surrounded, was besieged for some time, and also we saw in the Crimea as well later that that there was these evacuations from. Oh no, sorry, that was in the summer of 42. So Armenia did have these. It was clearly marked as a hospital ship. Now, would that make it a war crime? I'm not too certain actually. I don't know what the law was as it was then. Now, in Ukraine, we've seen a case where, in fact, I did a video on this, where the Russians actually they were on their official. This all comes from their Telegram channels, that they're claiming they rescued some orphans from and it showed a, a vehicle with big Red Cross signs and machine guns on it. And this all came from Russian official sources. So, and I did a video on that. So it shows that they've been there. In Ukraine, they're deliberately using the Red Cross sign. Now, when I was doing things related to medical assistance or humanitarian assistance in Ukraine, we had on our vehicles. I've also got videos of this. We had the Red Cross sign, but when we had we had also military supplies once, and I utterly made sure that the Red Cross sign was taken off. And it wasn't even military as such. We had drones on us, which could have a potential military capacity. So I mean, I absolutely had it taken off. To me, there's some things you do and some things you don't. But then there are those who obey rules, and there's those who don't. Anyway, Swellington writes, except the victors don't write history in their favour, none in the past 100 years, give or take. I just read or saw something a day or two ago that someone going over the reasons why that particular cliche just isn't true in the modern era, in particular World War II. If the victors did write history in favour of themselves, then they've done an absolutely poor job. Yeah, well, actually, I disagree with the victors writing history as well, because I'm going to give you two examples. Do you know what I mean? Just as they did, for example, in Afghanistan or Vietnam. There's two very good examples where the victors do not write history. Anyways, and there's plenty of examples. I mean, the sources I use most of, for example, when I've done these things, Wilhelm Gustloff and Goya. This comes from German sources above all, except for the submarine movements where I've used Russian sources, but sorry, Soviet sources, I should say. Anyway, so Tim writes, thank you, best regards, I've subscribed. Oh, well, that's nice to know. John says, he missed the live feed. John's reading a book. It's about Ulrich von Hassel's daughter being arrested after her father was to the plot to assassinate Hitler. It covers this. She was held in Stutthof, which is very near from where the ship sailed from. Yes, Stutthof is to the west, to the east of Gdansk, and it's really where the concentration camp was in Stutthof, but the area is incredibly attractive. Actually, like most of the concentration camps, I know it sounds like a really odd thing, maybe even Auschwitz isn't a particularly nice area, but other camps are really attractive areas. I mean, Stutthof, you've got this, it's almost on the sandbar from but not quite, for the Vistula Lagoon. And so you walk through the forest, and you've got then you've got the beach, and you've got the sea. It's a really attractive area. That's possibly why my favorite area. And then I've gotten a comment in Arabic. Unfortunately, I can't speak Arabic, so I can't do anything about that. Now, sorry. So there we have yesterday's comment. So I'll come on to today's now. So hello, Balance, Craig, Senor, and yeah. So only 183 survivors out of 6,700 estimated. Yeah. And Senor asked, did the Kriegsmarine seize it from Norway? No, it was seized from its private owner, because I suppose when you say from Norway, you mean was it seized from the Norwegian government? No, it was seized from the private people, the private company that actually Lindbergh, which owned it. And Senor also points out no emergency equipment, I bet. Yeah, but that was quite common. I find submarines to be quite interesting. I mean, I know I could stand being in one. I'd go absolutely, I think I'd go crazy. I mean, in the Second World War, it was bad enough, but these ones they have today, which stay submerged for months at a time, and I just cannot imagine what it would be like cooped up in this metal tin and you can't get any sun. Your eyes can't see normal light. It's all artificial. To me, it seems I just can't understand why anybody want to go on one of them things. I mean, okay, it might be fun to go in for a few hours, well, a few minutes maybe, but I'm sure I'll get utterly sick of it beforehand. On the other hand, I do find the stories such as this, as how they actually worked, the strategic bit to be quite interesting. I can't really comment too much on the uses of tactical. It's not like the military army stuff I have actually been trained on, but with submarines, I really don't know. The captain who sank the Gustav and the Steuben, Marinesco, is a really curious character. Definitely worth doing a video on him. His father came from Romania and he was a sailor, and he struck a non-commissioned officer on one of the boats, so he got locked up for it. He escaped and he fled to Russia, and as it was then, and he then ended up in Odessa. He married a local lady, and in 1900 and was it 7? I think it was 9. No, 1911, 1913, that was it. His son was born. He is the future U-boat captain, or the submarine captain, I should say. And so in the Second World War, he's got this dreadful disciplinary record. And but the problem was this: as he was the record holder, they had to sort of cover up this drinking. He clearly had targets which he couldn't be bothered to actually fire at. The crew clearly didn't think much of him because he was drunk all the time, and but he should have got a medal. He didn't get a medal until Gorbachev gave it to him in 1990, by which time he was long dead. He died of cancer, aged 49, in 1963. Anyway, definitely worth doing a video on him, I think. So that's it for today, I think. Thank you very much for being here with me, and I'd be grateful if you give it a thumbs up if you think it's worth it, that is, because that ought to help me with the what's it called, the algorithm, to get more views. The more views I get, hopefully that'll mean that I can get more finance, more cash, and the more cash I can do actually more videos. And whereas I've got absolutely no intention of giving up my normal job, and indeed I certainly wouldn't put my employer in that position, but it would be nice to be able to actually do more. Potentially also, I mean, I'd like to think I could actually live from this, but I mean that can only happen if I get something like 1.5 million views a month, and it's nowhere near something like that. So at the moment, thanks so much for being here. I'll just check there's no and good night. Thank you very much, and bye from me. Bye for now. Tomorrow I'll do another video. Haven't quite decided what I'm going to do yet. I'll think of it tomorrow morning, and then I'll decide then. So bye for now.